done? What came over me? Who am I? It was wonderful. I loved every minute of it.
At 78, Sally Field stands as one of Hollywood's true survivors, a woman with nothing left to prove. 2 Academy Awards, a lifetime of iconic performances, and a legacy built on raw honesty and depth. But behind the applause and heartfelt performances lies a side of Sally the public rarely sees. It's the story of a woman who remembers every slight, every betrayal, every co-star who mistook her kindness for weakness. And now, with the weight of age and wisdom behind her, Sally Field is finally revealing the names of the 6 actors she hated the most. These weren't petty spats or fleeting disagreements. These were deep, bruising clashes, some on set, others behind the scenes, that shaped the course of her career and haunted her long after the cameras stopped rolling. You think you've seen the real Hollywood? Think again. What you're about to hear will shatter that illusion. Let's start with the egomaniac, Tommy Lee Jones. When Sally signed on to Back Roads, she was full of hope. The script was raw and real, a chance to explore complex emotions with an actor of great intensity. But from the very first day, she hit a wall, and that wall was Tommy himself. He wasn't just distant, he was dismissive. No small talk, no camaraderie, no spark. He'd show up, deliver his lines with mechanical precision, and vanish the moment the scene ended. For an actress who built her career on emotional honesty, that kind of detachment was almost unbearable. We were supposed to play 2 broken people finding love, Sally later recalled. But I was playing alone. She tried to connect, initiating conversation between takes, cracking light jokes, asking questions about their characters, but he barely looked at her. He made her feel small, like she didn't deserve to share the same set. When Back Roads was released, critics pointed to the lack of chemistry between the leads. What they didn't see was the frost that lingered between takes. For Sally, every day on that set felt colder than the last. Acting opposite a man who refused to see her, to even acknowledge her humanity, drained her spirit. She never worked with Tommy Lee Jones again. And though she never spoke harshly of him in later interviews, her tone carried a quiet chill, the kind that says more than words ever could. She would never forget how cold a movie set could feel, not just the temperature, but the silence, the tension, the loneliness. Yet not every feud in Sally Field's career was quiet. Some burned like fire. Next came the heartbreaker, Burt Reynolds. To the world, he and Sally Field were pure magic. The golden couple of the late 1970s, charming audiences with their effortless chemistry in Smokey and the Bandit. On screen, they were laughter, love, and lightning in a bottle. Off-screen, it was a very different story. Behind the cameras, that fairy tale romance began to rot. Sally would later describe Burt not as the charming rogue America adored, but as a man obsessed with control. Someone who needed to dominate every conversation, every moment, every decision. He belittled her subtly, chipped away at her confidence, mocked her looks and intellect, until she questioned her own worth. In public, he showered her with compliments that stung once the cameras stopped rolling. In private, she was met with cold silences and cutting remarks. In her memoir In Pieces, Sally stripped away the glamour and exposed the truth. Burt never wanted a partner, he wanted a possession. He silenced her, interrupted her, decided for her. Professionally, personally, it was always about him. She wasn't his equal, she was his ornament. And when she finally saw it for what it was, the heartbreak wasn't just in losing him. It was in realizing she'd lost herself along the way. Worse, he manipulated her emotions. One moment, Burt Reynolds was tender and adoring. The next, he turned cold, using silence as punishment. It was emotional manipulation disguised as love. Slowly, Sally Field began to lose pieces of herself. Even at the height of her fame, standing beside him made her feel invisible. "I was there," she would later say, "but not me. Not the full me." Despite their years together, Sally admitted she was never sure who Burt really was. The charming, confident man adored by millions wasn't the same person she faced when the cameras stopped rolling. Still, she tried. She wanted to make it work, to believe the love she felt was enough. "I wanted to love him. I did love him. But he hurt me." To the world, he was the bandit, bold, untouchable, magnetic. To Sally, he was heartbreak wearing a smile. Enter the scene stealer, Robert Blake. During the filming of Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole, Sally came face to face with one of the most explosive personalities she'd ever encountered. Blake was known for his intense method acting and wild, unpredictable moods. He didn't just act unpredictably, he lived it, breathing chaos into every corner of the set. From day one, Sally could sense the storm brewing. Blake would change lines without warning, veer off script mid-scene, and deliberately ruin carefully planned takes with random improvisations. What he called creative freedom, Sally saw for what it was: sabotage. She accused him of constantly undermining her, not just when the cameras were rolling, but even behind the scenes. Worse still, his volatility infected the entire crew. One moment, he was calm and focused. The next, he'd explode, shouting at technicians, cursing lighting crews, or storming off set over the smallest disagreement. For Sally, already stretched thin by the emotional demands of her role, it was exhausting. She tried to mediate, to hold the production together, but the chaos was too much. Eventually, the tension poisoned everything. Scenes fell apart, trust vanished, and the project collapsed. Say Goodbye, Maggie Cole was shelved before it ever reached an audience, a film lost to dysfunction. For most actors, it might have been a career setback. For Sally, it was something far deeper, a wound. Later, she reflected on the experience with rare candor. "There are actors who act," she said softly, "and there are actors who make everyone else small, just so they can feel big." Robert Blake, she made clear, was the second kind. Her words weren't angry, they were weary. The kind of truth that comes only from surviving the storm. Sally walked away from that set with one quiet promise to herself: never again would she mistake chaos for genius. But not every feud was born under studio lights. Some began under spotlights of another kind, during award season. Enter the bitter rival, Shirley MacLaine. To the world, Steel Magnolias was a triumph. Two Hollywood legends sharing the screen in a tender, emotional story about love, loss, and resilience. On screen, their chemistry sparkled. Off-screen, it simmered with tension. From the very first day, Sally felt the clash. She approached her role as MLYNN with deep emotional honesty, raw, wounded, vulnerable. She wanted truth. Shirley, however, came at it like a competition, a battle of egos wrapped in Southern charm. Every scene became a subtle power struggle, every exchange a test of who could command the frame. What audiences saw as harmony was, in reality, a storm just barely contained. Whispers drifted through the set, whispers that Shirley MacLaine treated every scene like a battlefield. Crew members said she turned each moment into a power struggle, boasting endlessly about her Oscar wins, dismissing direction, and interrupting takes to grab attention that wasn't meant for her. Sally Field, ever the professional, tried to rise above it. She smiled when she wanted to scream, hit her marks, and delivered her lines with grace. But behind that calm exterior, she was worn thin. One scene, an emotional centerpiece meant to break hearts, took 17 takes. Not because Sally couldn't get it right, but because Shirley refused to play it straight. Every time Sally poured her soul into the performance, Shirley would toss in a sarcastic remark, twisting raw grief into mockery. It was as if she couldn't bear to let anyone else have the spotlight. Years later, Sally would only hint at what happened, saying simply that Shirley brought a cloud of chaos wherever she went. The words weren't laced with anger, just truth. This wasn't a creative clash. It was a collision of egos. Shirley needed control. Sally wanted authenticity. And when the final cut rolled, only one of them left the set unscathed. Audiences wept at MLYNN's devastating monologue, unaware that the real pain had happened behind the camera. Sally never forgot the sting, the quiet humiliation of having her truth turned into someone else's show. But her next co-star would wound her in an even deeper way. The manipulator, James Woods. Their film Kiss Me Goodbye was meant to be charming, light-hearted, romantic. But from the very beginning, Sally sensed something dark beneath the surface, and that darkness was Woods himself. He was brilliant, yes, but volatile. His intensity filled every room, twisting playful scenes into psychological chess matches. He didn't just act, he analyzed, rewrote, and argued. Lines became debates, rehearsals became battlegrounds. Sally, a performer who thrived on trust and connection, found herself suffocating under his dominance. She would later call him intellectually intimidating, a man who used his intelligence not to collaborate, but to control. On set, he questioned the script, criticized the direction, and even dissected her performance, while the cameras were rolling. The tension became suffocating. But the real blow came off camera. Woods began to chip away at her confidence, making sly comments that cut deep. "You're not giving enough," he told her one day. "Your heart's not in it." To anyone else, it might have sounded like a note. To Sally, it was a dagger. His words weren't about improving the scene, they were meant to break her spirit. And for the first time in her career, Sally Field didn't just feel disrespected, she felt betrayed. He wasn't challenging her to rise higher, he was chipping away at her confidence, making her question the very instincts that had defined her career. For Sally Field, who had spent decades earning respect in an industry ruled by men, it was a bitter realization. Not every battle was fought on screen. Some took place in silence, in glances, tone, and the quiet erosion of self-worth. Later, she wouldn't describe Kiss Me Goodbye as an artistic challenge, but as a psychological minefield. "It wasn't the role that wore me down," she would say softly. "It was having to constantly prove I belonged." When the film wrapped, she walked away changed, not defeated, but hardened. She made herself a promise that day. Never again would she let a man's ego dictate her worth. Never again would she confuse arrogance with genius. And then came the name no one expected. Dustin Hoffman. To the world, Hoffman was untouchable, a Hollywood titan, a method actor worshipped for his brilliance, a man whose name was synonymous with prestige. But to Sally Field, he was something else entirely. Not a mentor. Not a peer. Just a crushing disappointment. They never starred together, yet in the early 1980s, their paths nearly converged, during auditions for a now-forgotten film that never even made it to production. For Sally, it was supposed to be a new beginning, a collaboration between two powerhouses. Instead, it became one of the most humiliating experiences of her life. From the moment she stepped into the room, the air belonged to Hoffman. He cracked jokes with the producers, mocked parts of the script, and turned the room into his stage. When Sally began her reading, he interrupted, not once, but several times, cutting into her lines to correct her tone, question her delivery, and explain how the scene should feel. It wasn't guidance. It was domination. In front of everyone, Sally, a two-time Emmy winner, was reduced to feeling like a nervous schoolgirl. She wasn't being critiqued, she was being diminished. It felt like auditioning for someone who had already decided I wasn't enough, she later recalled. The final insult came days later, when she heard through a mutual acquaintance that Hoffman had boasted about what he'd done. He claimed the chemistry wasn't there, and that he'd made sure of it. To Sally, that wasn't just unprofessional. It was cruel. For weeks, she turned it over in her mind, wondering if she'd somehow failed. But with time, clarity came. The issue wasn't her performance, it was his need to dominate, to prove he was the smartest man in the room, even if it meant crushing someone else to do it. She later called that audition one of the most humiliating moments of my professional life. But it also became a turning point, a moment of awakening. From that day forward, Sally Field made another vow: no more working with men who mistake arrogance for brilliance. And this time, she kept that promise.